Okay, we'll get started and we'll work to get her online. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are. Let's see. I'm Ellie. I'm the co-director of DIAG, Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. My pronouns are no. We're not going to do any of that stuff. Kidding. DIAG is a 501c3 nonprofit organization of lifelong Democratic voters working to depoliticize and shed light on the ideologically driven medical scandal and the associated harms that have resulted from the adoption of gender ideology and sex denialism. We're building a movement to shift the prevailing narrative around the experimental, dangerous medical practices that comprise sex trait modification, euphemistically known as gender-affirming care, and to clear the path for a safer, saner, evidence-based response to gender distress. Please visit our website at diag.org. That's di-ag.org. Please also check out our merch store. We've got some great stuff there. And if you'd like to help us continue and expand the work we're doing, please hit the donate button. DIAG believes in the liberal value of free speech and open discussion, which is part of why we host these spaces, to invite conversation on topics that have been left out of the public discourse. The opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily the opinions of our organization. Our topic today is sex and sport. Traditionally, male and female athletes have competed in separate categories, and according to a Gallup poll last year, most Americans want to keep it that way. 69% of respondents said that trans-identified athletes should compete on teams that correspond to their sex. Dems were split essentially 50-50, but I would bet that those numbers have shifted in support of women and girls since that poll was taken. Despite those numbers, we're seeing an increasing number of males taking the places of women and girls on teams and on podiums. And this year, the Biden administration revised Title IX regulations to include gender identity as a protected category, prompting numerous court challenges on the grounds that the new rules erode the original intent of Title IX, which was, of course, to guarantee equal opportunities for women and girls. Disappointingly, we only saw pushback from red states, which sadly is not a surprise. Today, we are very proud to have assembled an incredible panel to talk about the threat to girls and women's sports, how it's happening, why sports organizations have acquiesced to the demands to accommodate male athletes. We'll also talk about the Orwellian Coaching Her educational program, which maybe it should be called Coaching Him. So let me introduce our panelists. Let's see, looks like we don't have Sarah on quite yet. Let me check in. We're going to start by introducing our panelists. First, I'm honored to welcome Martina Navratilova, one of the best tennis players of all time. You can't say that about very many people. She won 59 major singles and doubles titles, the open era record for the most Grand Slam titles won by any player, male or female. And now, in the name of fairness, safety, and privacy for girls and women, she helps lead the international effort to restrict female sports and locker rooms to just females. So welcome, Martina.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. We also have three-time Olympic champion Nancy Hogshaed, a civil rights lawyer and the founder and CEO of Champion Women, a nonprofit providing legal advocacy for girls and women in sports. The focus areas include equal play, such as traditional Title IX compliance in athletic departments, sexual harassment, abuse, and assault, upholding sports sex segregation, as well as employment, pregnancy, and sexual orientation discrimination. Martina and Nancy both belong to the Women's Sports Policy Working Group, which is a group of Democratic elite athletes and administrators with a long history of women's sports policymaking and LGBTQ advocacy. Its mission is to affirm and strengthen girls' and women's legal right to separate single-sex sports competition. So we'll introduce Sarah when we get her on, since we get her on, which hopefully will happen soon. But I want to start by asking each of you to answer just briefly, in a couple sentences, why is keeping women's and girls' sports female only important? Why do that? The counter argument that we hear is that teaching kindness and inclusivity for trans-identified athletes is more important. That's a bigger lesson than winning a medal or a trophy, especially when we're not talking about elite sports here. We're talking about middle school soccer or high school track. How can we be so mean as to exclude these males? Martina, you want to weigh in on that?
I will first. Yeah, sure. My life has been about fairness. That's my North Star, really. Whenever I see unfairness, I speak up and have gotten into lots of trouble over that. And, we're not just talking about elite sports, we're talking about any sport. Girls know, though boys are stronger, they're faster, they can do more things than girls. And keeping sports fair, you can't have it all. We are at a time when everybody wants to get a participation medal. And maybe I'm too old school for that, because I believe you have to earn your medals. So participating is one thing, winning and having the opportunity to win is another. And for that, we need to keep sports sex separated, which means girls and women only, and then a free-for-all on the other end.
Okay. All right. Nancy, you want to weigh in, add anything to that?
Yeah. So when I swam the decade right after the 1976 Olympics, where East Germans really dominated. And I competed against the East Germans and the Russians regularly. And we all knew that they were cheating. And our society holds fairness to this very high standard. We look at it as it's a noble cause to talk about fairness in sport. And we have so many rules and regulations, not just drug testing that I'm going to talk a little bit more about, but also like what people can wear, what kind of tennis racket, what kind of swimsuit, what kind of tennis shoes. I mean, the quest for fairness is long and storied. So the East German women, when they beat us, it was only by a little bit. They were nowhere near the men. So when you look at, swimming is a rare sport in that it is completely co-ed, meaning men and women, we train together. We typically have the same coach, the same facilities, the same locker rooms. Well, not the same locker rooms, right? But all the same. We go to the same competitions. We travel together. So if anybody knows the difference between men's and women's athletic performance, it is swimmers and track athletes. Those two are very co-ed types of sports. So when I was swimming, we were told that we had to shut up about the East Germans. And I really profoundly resented that, even as a youngster. And so what I wanted was somebody like me to speak up on my behalf. And that's exactly what I'm doing now, and what me and Martina and Donna DeVerona and Donna Lupiano, what we're doing now is we are trying to make sure that women's sports stays for women. Again, I cannot emphasize how big the difference is. There's no such thing as somebody who's born a woman, somebody who's born a female, a girl, and then they can go on drugs and be competitive against the men. It's impossible. So it's a one-way street. It's only men coming into women's sports. And we all, as Democrats, need to come together and make sure that our leaders know that this is it's not a kindness. And that the way that sport gets inclusion, the way that it gets diversity, is it creates categories. So whether they're weight categories, whether they're age categories, whether they are, are you A, B, C, D type swimmer, right? We have different classifications. If in Paralympics, they have all different kinds of classifications. So that's how we have more people be able to participate in sport. There is no other gap as between men and women that is the same as any other category. So in other words, the difference in weight categories, say in weightlifting, between one category and another is nowhere near as big as the category between men and women. It is enormous, and it's not degrading for women to be able to say that. We are perfect exactly the way that we are. And in order to have equality in sport, we need to have our own team. So I'm grateful to get to talk to all these other Democrats and try to get change to the current policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. The other aspect here, so you hear about, well, we need to be more kind about, and the other, for instance, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut recently argued that only a tiny fraction of all school athletes identify as transgender. This is another common refrain we hear. So, opposition to their competing on women's teams, it's just culture war politics. It's just, dividing people, using it as a way to marginalize and harm people. Does he have a point? Are we talking about a non-issue being used simply to harm a vulnerable minority?
So I'll jump in here, Martina, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
And just say that I want you to notice that there's no other category that people are talking about making the boundaries of that category weaker as a way to be kind to other people. So you could easily say the same thing about, a heavier athlete. Be kind. Let them compete at the lighter weight class. It's only women. So what is, one thing I've learned throughout my career is to never underestimate the power of sexism. And so that's what you're seeing here. It's only the women's category that is being invaded. I would say one is way too many, but right now we have, what is it, Martina? It's like 715 or something.
It's 100. I mean, it goes into thousands. It's total undercount. We don't even know how many there are. The point is, how many is too many is what I would like to ask these people. How many is too many? Is it 10,000? Is it 100,000? Is it 5? I don't know. How many is too many? Because for every trans person, male, who identifies as a woman, that competes, a girl or a woman loses their spot. It's that simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there are a couple of really good websites. One is hecheats.com, and the other one is She Won. And they both document literally hundreds and hundreds of transgender people who are taking the place of women in sport.
Yeah.
Both of those sites. Is it? I just want to make sure that it's hecheats.com, not .org. That was the.
I'm not 100% sure which one it is.
All right, we'll check both of them. Well, it's an incredible site, and you can sort by dates or countries or sport, and it's just an amount of data there. Oh, we have Sarah on. Oh,
yeah,
fabulous. Boy, that was a lot of work. Okay, we're gonna get there up as speaker, hopefully.
But I mean, we in swimming, we had Leah Thomas, and after Leah Thomas, the swimming administrators got together, and so both USA Swimming and World Aquatics got together and said, we're not going to have that anymore. And it's not. This is how we get women to have opportunities. when I first started, we're talking, 40 years ago, started working in the issue of women's sports, I started this mantra of saying over and over and over again, which was, in order to give women equal opportunities in sports, they need their own team. So I was saying that long before the transgender issue, but it holds equally as true today. In order to give girls and women equal opportunities in sports, they have to have their own team.
Yeah. It's becoming clearer as we get more information and as more people are speaking out. I think people know this inherently, but they, for some reason, they need to hear the data and the the evidence for this. We do have Sarah on. Sarah, welcome. I know that wasn't easy, but smooth sailing figure out, I promise you. Thanks for joining us. I know we may not have Martina for the entire space, so I want to ask Martina some questions up front and get her input. First, for some historical perspective, you competed against and lost to a man in your famous 1992 match against Jimmy Connors, which I have to remember. So what was that about? What was your takeaway from it? Why did you do it?
Well, it sounded like a good idea at the time, but I was kind of past my prime, as was Jimmy. And I guess the takeaway is that he wasn't old enough for me to beat him, even with a handicap that was smaller than the usual handicaps they used to do when we had Battle of the Sexes back in the 70s. But, I wanted to see how well I can do against Jimmy, but it just, even though he's older and he had a bit of a handicap, it was not enough. And no matter how well you play, no matter how hard you train, women cannot compete with men. The only time you can beat them is that they're not good enough or old enough. Too old. Like Billie Jean beat Bobby because Bobby was too old. If Bobby had been 10 years younger, he would have beaten Billie Jean. So enough of this battle of the sexes. Men and women are built differently. And, I thought it would be fun. But looking back, I probably wish I hadn't played. I don't know. It was okay. It was not the big a deal at the time.
Yeah. Well, it was a big deal for the viewers, but I don't think anybody walked away from it saying, some kind of message about, whether or not allowed women's sports. There was no takeaway like that.
Yeah.
And Martina, you made an extraordinary political statement when you asked for political asylum in the U.S. just 18 years old. And, is this activism driven at all by your background? Are you kind of an activist at heart? And what's the history on that been?
I think I'm an activist because I can be. I left my country where you couldn't really speak up. You would be getting in trouble. You may not be able to get into proper school or get kicked out of work and never let out of the country. It was not a free country. Czechoslovakia back then was a communist country. So when I defected and I was able to speak out, of course I was never going to be quiet about it. And I always, again, fought for fairness, and I never shirked from that. Because, again, leaving my country and not being able to know when I would ever see my parents, everything after that was a piece of cake. So coming out as a lesbian or fighting for equal rights for women, fighting for equal prize monies for tennis players, etc., even if it wasn't a popular thing, I just didn't really care because I was free to do as I saw fit, and I always tried to be on the right side of history and always fighting for the little guy. So right now I'm just fighting for women and girls because we are the little guys in this fight.
Yeah,
if I can brag on Martina, she was the first professional athlete to be lesbian who came out and said that she was gay and has been unrelenting since then, has not missed a beat with supporting gay rights, gay marriage. She's married right now. Can I brag on you?
Sure. Oh, please go ahead.
She adopted, two beautiful little boys. They're so cute. But she's somebody who not just on this issue, but she was way ahead of her time and on gay and lesbian rights as well.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh.
Yep.
Um, uh, you know,
So on that front, let me just interject.
yeah,
It kills me. It just kills me that the people that attack me the most are the people on the left on this issue of trans male identified males in women's sports or women's sex-based spaces. I've been called all kinds of horrible names. When the right wing calls me bad names and they say, "Oh, you should just vote for Trump because he is all for women," I can block those people, but I want to block leftists. But it kills me that all of a sudden I've been fighting for gay rights for 40 years, and now they're calling me transphobic, bigot, or homophobic, all of these names. You guys are not paying attention. You are not paying attention to what this philosophy and action does to women and girls. And I am just so disappointed with the Democratic politicians that agree with us that will not speak up.
Yeah, Women's Sports Policy Working Group, you can go onto our website, and we've written a number of white papers that we've given to various, legislators. We've had as many meetings as we know how to. And as Martina just said, we've had so many legislators and policy decision makers say, I totally agree with you, but and then, right? And so that's why we're on this today, is we want to eliminate that. But
yeah.
Yeah. Talking about that a little bit, when you started your career, so it was 70s, 80s, 90s, that coincided with the expansion of women's sports in the U.S. under Title IX. And which, by the way, like the setting up the was passed by Richard Nixon.
No, go figure, right?
Yeah, our favorite president, everybody's favorite president, Richard Nixon. And the EPA is probably captured by now. All I can imagine that everything is captured. Anyway, what was the atmosphere for women's athletes back then compared with where we are now? Are you surprised where progressives are with this?
Nancy needs to speak to that, but I would just say I was really surprised when I came here. Growing up in a communist country, perhaps the only good thing about growing up in a communist system is that it's equal for women athletes and women in general. Doctors, professors, and women athletes were just as venerated as male athletes. So it was a surprise to me when I came to the States and I saw women athletes, girls were supposed to be the cheerleaders, not the athletes. And I was shocked to find that out. So Nancy can speak more to how it's changed or what's going on.
Yeah, just when I was growing up, first of all, I got so much of this, you look like a man. Like, people think that that Iona, the rugby player, sort of, she's the first person to encounter this, and so much body shaming, and this idea that, for me, I'm straight, and this idea like I was never going to get married, I was never going to find somebody that would love me, care about me, and so it was hard to be a female and being an athlete, particularly being such an elite athlete, and we've just come so far. I remember I was giving a presentation to an all-boys school about the importance of women's sports. We're talking, this is, 25 years ago. And the boys kind of, said, like, look, all of our girlfriends play sports. Like, everybody we know, like, we're at 100% here. And I loved it. Just how the fact that now women's sports is so normalized, that being strong is so much more normalized, that I couldn't be more excited about it. As you said in the nice introduction, thank you very much, that I run a nonprofit called Champion Women. We've written 101 complaints to the Office of Civil Rights, showing just how badly schools are still discriminating against women. My guess would be not many of you all listeners would know that. would know that schools are denying women about 225,000 athletic opportunities. They're denying women about $1.13 billion in athletic scholarships. If schools gave women equal recruiting dollars, they would have to increase their budgets nationally, on average, 277%. So, right, these are big numbers. These are not little ones. And so we wrote formal complaints to the Department of Ed, and I've been torturing my research assistants because we just keep making them better and better, right? But so here we are in this position where I feel like women's sports is at this moment where we are getting more and more respect. We've got the Caitlin Clarks and so many other athletes, and yet that we have this issue where we've got men that are trying to come in onto women's sports, and I don't think that's an accident. I think that in my day, it would have been humiliating for a male to participate on a women's team. And now, because women's sports they've gained so much in credibility that that now they want in on it. Some of them do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, it's the idea that, for so long, women's rights were so key and central to the Democratic platform and just, part of, liberal principles.
Yeah.
And, I am kind of dumbfounded about this shift where, where we have the right, for whatever reasons, and I think there are a range of them, championing the, classically liberal causes.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-boggling.
It boggles me too that and I've worked with all these civil rights groups in my entire career, and they have formally written me a letter to say that I'm no longer welcome to not be involved. It is crazy town. Yeah.
Martina, while we have you, I'm going to ask this question. I was contacted by the mother who has a child caught in there, and she says she was a ball girl for you at Virginia Slims in the 1970s. I'm even saying that, I don't know if other people know this, but Virginia Slims is the cigarette brand, which, the irony there is,
Okay.
Yeah. So she wants to know.
Yeah. Why does it keep saying?
Sarah, go ahead. I'm glad to hear your voice, but can you put your mic off?
It said mute.
There.
Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. Hi, Sarah.
I can hear you.
So,
embarrassing. Okay.
No, faces are a whole nother animal. Don't worry about it. So she wanted to know if you'd spoken to Renee Richards about this and what Renee Richards' opinion is on the current situation.
I absolutely have spoken to Renee. She's a supporter of our group. And she says now she should not have. Okay, Renee is very private. She likes to keep to herself. I've known her since 1977, I think. Was my coach, a very good friend. We're still in touch. And Renee says now she should not have been allowed to play. She won the right. She sued for the right to play because she was adjudicated as a female, as a woman back in the 70s. And won the right to compete. And that's where we started the sex testing, actually, with the bar body test. Anyhow, Renee now says she should not have been allowed to play because even in her 40s, when she had been out of shape, hadn't played tennis for 10 years, when she started playing again, she got to number 30 in the world as a 43-year-old woman. And when I played her, I beat her. I was number 1, number 2 in the world when I played her. I had a hard time beating her. But we're friends. I played doubles with her, and she became my coach. So again, this has nothing to do with any transphobia or any prejudice or phobia that we have. It's all about fairness. And Renee now herself recognizes she should not have played. She should not have been allowed to play.
Yeah, that's interesting. Does she speak out?
She has, but she keeps pretty private. But when I say to people, you know, the trans activists that when I say, well, Renee agrees with me because they're calling me names. What would you call her? So then the trans activists dismiss Renee for being too old, that she doesn't know what she's talking about, or she's actually self-hating trans person. It's like,
Right.
are you kidding me? She's lived as a woman for 50 years, but she hates herself. Got it. Okay.
Right. There's always a way out.
Yeah.
Always. Okay, so currently we have a push to expand with this subset of males. And that brings us to coaching her. I'm getting a lot of background noise.
Me too.
Not speak, and you, if you just turn your mic off, click the mic button on the bottom right. Yeah, that'll, until you're speaking, that'll really help. Great, thank you. So this brings us to coaching her, which really, it's about as Orwellian as it gets, because this is not about coaching girls and women. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read Sarah Barker's Substack articles on this program, which are incredible. That's at the female category Substack. If you haven't subscribed to that or read her articles, you're really missing out. They're incredible. And so on the female category Substack, Sarah, you've written that organizations ostensibly devoted to protecting women and girls sport are now instead advancing this activist agenda to include males in female sports. Can you give people who haven't read up a rundown on what this program is and how you found out about it and who the players are?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I had some trouble getting on here. Anyway, yeah. So coaching her is an online education, or as it may be, re-education program directed at coaches, and it was developed by Nike and the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sports, which is housed at the University of Minnesota. So backing up a little bit, Nike, of course, is the largest sports company in the world. I think in 2023, they did $51 billion worth in revenue. They generated $51 billion worth in revenue. They have enormous, unspeakable influence in the world of sports in as far as the IOC International Olympic Committee, NCAA, sports governing bodies, sports organizations of all kinds, policy. They can influence this with their resources. If Nike had turned their attention to championing single-sex sports, we would not be sitting here talking about it right now. That would have happened yesterday. That such is their influence in sports, but they didn't. In fact, they have been spending the last several decades and millions of dollars working to get males in women's sports. In 2019, they approached the Tucker Center, which had by that time also abandoned women and girls and science and reality at the same time in service of promoting gender ideology instead of science, instead of reality. So Nike approached the Tucker Center with practically an unlimited budget and said, if you could do anything, and the words that the director of coaching her said was to make social impact. If you could do anything to make social impact, what would it be? So the Nike and the Tucker Center both know that you can't, there is very little public support for something called Let's Get Boys in Girls Sports. There's, no one's going to support something that says, hey, let's get boys in girls sports. There's no support for that. So they women washed it, which is what girls organizations like the Tucker Center do. They identified a problem that is a real problem for girls, in that girls between the ages of 11 and 17 do drop out of sports at twice the rate of boys, and then miss out on a lot of benefits, social, emotional, mental, physical benefits that they could get from sports that they are not getting. So they identified a real problem. But the thing is, both Nike and the Tucker Center knew that the reason girls drop out of sport, they know what the reason is. There are many reasons, but the main one is negative body image. Girls are, their research has already confirmed this. Girls are self-conscious about doing sports in front of boys, sweating, the way their body looks, their body is changing, doing sports on their period, lack of skills, being judged by boys for their lack of skills, and all of these concerns that girls have surrounding body image are reduced or eliminated by having single-sex sports, which is another thing that girls have told Nike and the Tucker Center that is vitally important to them. Single-sex sports. So you would think that they would pursue this, right? No, in fact, they did the opposite. They ignored girls' desire for single-sex sports, and in fact did the opposite, and defined a girl as anyone who identifies as a girl, which would be a boy, and thus gaslit girls to say, oh, no, see that boy over there, that's actually a girl. And so they invited, their work is including boys in girls' sports. So it's no longer single sex, it's mixed sex sports, which is exactly what girls did not want. This causes girls, this is an additional reason that girls would drop out of sports. It's mixed sex sports, which is what they don't want. So that's very contradictory. To begin with. So if their aim was to keep girls in sports, they contradicted that immediately, right off the bat, by including boys in girls' sports. Additionally, the director, when I spoke with the director of coaching her, she said that she admitted the number one reason girls dropped out of sports was body image, but coaching her is not focused on body image. They blamed coaches' gender bias and stereotypes for girls dropping out of sports. This is not supported by any of their research. Any of their own research does not say girls drop out of sports because of coaches, gender bias, and stereotypes. Very odd, right? So they've identified a real problem, but they've gone about fixing it in a very strange way. But the reason they targeted coaches becomes clear once you take the training modules, which I did. I read everything and the supporting studies that go with coaching her. The coaches are population of people who are generally very up to date, more so than the general population, on sports science surrounding girls in sports, and specifically about sex differences between males and females in sports. They're very in tune to that. This is what they see every single day, and they are intimately familiar with sex differences between males and females. Therefore, coaches actually present a major stumbling block to gender ideology, because they know that a boy is not a girl, and that boys do, in fact, have sports advantage, physiological differences that provide sports advantage over girls. Coaches know that. So they aimed this in this kind of very insidious, they aimed this re-education in, I would say they called it education, I would call it indoctrination program at coaches. And the way they did this was using outright lies or framing facts as bias. For example, in the module on body image, they reminded coaches that a person's with a different gender identity, their body may not match their gender identity. This is a very veiled and obfuscating way of saying, and you won't know this unless you read their 242-page report that backs up this Coaching Her program, which I did. I read that. And in one point, it says, a person who identifies as female may feel female internally, but have a body that appears male. Well, that's a real hard way of saying this person has a penis. This person is male. This person has a penis. Okay? So, right in the Coaching Her module, it exhorts coaches to, and these were the words, accept all identities and bodies. So those were the exact words. So a body with a penis is simply a different girl body, a different type of girl body. And if you don't, see, that is your gender bias. That is your people who, that is your old-fashioned, out-of-date bias that a body with a penis is male. No, they're telling coaches that that is an out-of-date gender bias that they need to get rid of. Another example of framing actual fact as bias or stereotype, in a long list of stereotypes, they called them common stereotypes. They said, the Coaching Her module said, boys are stronger and faster than girls. They listed this as a stereotype. That's not a stereotype. That is a fact. Decades of presidential physical fitness data shows that boys are indeed, there is mountains of evidence that shows that boys are indeed stronger and faster than girls. This is a fact. But the Coaching Her program frames that as a stereotype, that something out of date and old-fashioned that a coach should dismiss and get rid of. And that was out of date and no longer valid. But of course, when I read the supporting research, there is no support. This is ideological. There was zero science. All of this was just stated by a trans advocate. There was no supporting scientific evidence. They just stated trans-identified boys have no advantage over girls. without any evidence. That is not true. That's not science, and it's not true. It's just ideology. One more example is I took a test that said you were to choose true and false. There are two biological sexes. I chose true. No. Coaching her said that's false. That's false. That sex is assigned female or male, and a third sex is intersex. That's not true. That is absolutely false. Intersex, which is not even the correct term, it's disorder of sexual development, is not a third sex. People with disorders of sexual development are male or female with a DSD. They prove the sex binary. It is not a third sex. So throughout, they use pseudoscience or outright lies, zero scientific evidence, to try to indoctrinate coaches into accepting boys as girls in girls' sports. This is problematic. I found this extremely insidious and bizarre. And when I read through the supposedly supporting research, there was none. It was simply people saying boys have no advantage over girls without it was utterly without scientific evidence.
So,
um,
I'm going to ask you a couple questions.
yeah.
So, first, one thing is that I think what we see this in the medical aspect of this as well, that evidence, people are being asked to produce evidence for things that are self-evident. We all know that you shouldn't irreversibly harm a child, that children can't, consent to things that they can't comprehend. And we know, I don't think there's anybody alive that doesn't think that, when you look at males and females, yes, you will have this overlap, an extremely, weak male and a very strong athletic female. It's not that the rule is that no females are stronger or faster than all males. That's not
Well,
what we're talking.
that's not science. They don't understand. They don't understand science. That's not the way you compare. That's not the way you compare people.
Right. Yeah. So, I want to ask, do coaches do they believe that males turn, what are the coaches? The coaches see these kids, they work with these kids, they know these kids. Do they believe, are they believing this? Do they buy into it?
I can't speak for all coaches, obviously, but I think the vast majority do not believe that. I mean, I think the vast majority do not believe that. No. The next question is, of course, are they forced to go along with this? Yes. And the answer to that is yes, because I think you maybe remember the coach out in Oregon of when the boy won a state title in the girls track meet. A coach of an opposing team simply said there should be maybe a third category for trans athletes, and he lost his job for that. He lost his job for speaking up about that it was unfair for this male to compete in the girls category. And I think that is very much the case in all the at least the states. What are there? 26 states that have adopted gender identity overwritten sex in Title IX. So in those states where gender identity rules, you could very definitely lose your job for standing up for girls sports, for not accepting a boy who identified as a girl in girls sports. You could
Yeah.
definitely lose your job. Absolutely. Yes.
Nancy, do you want to, I see your hand raised. Do you want to chime in?
Yes, so we have a petition that is signed by over 500 Olympians, Paralympians, and national team athletes, and it's signed by over 700 coaches. And if anybody knows the differences between males and females, it is the coaches who, like, it's kind of insulting for people to say, "Oh, Nancy, you could have been better if there just hadn't been sexism at the time." Like there were other women who just didn't get into sport, or I didn't work as hard. But you will never find a swimming coach in particular, and track and field coach, that is going to say that women don't work as hard, or right. We are built from a very different template. Men and women, we are built very differently. And again, I said it before, but we are both perfect. We are absolutely the way that we're supposed to be. And, so yeah, this idea that it's just sexism that is keeping Katie Ledecky from breaking the men's record is absurd. And coaches know it. People in sport know it.
But we're still not seeing, we're not seeing pushback, any kind of organized pushback from coaches or within given sports.
Because they can't. The ones that have spoken out have lost their jobs.
Exactly. Yes.
There was another coach at Oberlin College who said the same thing. Anyway. Yeah, no, lots and lots of people have lost their job over gender ideology.
Which I think, that speaks very strongly to how wrong this is. I mean, why on earth would you lose your job over saying something like so fundamental as women's sports should be for women? This speaks to something being very wrong about this.
Yeah, the other question I have is do you see, is there any chance, the groups that have the teams that do have males on the female teams, are there coaches who just say, well, we're going to win if we allow these, young men or boys on our team, we're going to win, and so that's important too. I mean, is that a reality?
Well, like Leah Thomas's coach got a huge bonus for having a NCAA champion. So, right, and to his credit, he wouldn't let Leah continue to be able to train there. But Penn, University of Pennsylvania, that coach, right? So coaches they win and lose on they live and die on their win-loss records in sports. So this is, it's a way for them to win, number one. And number two is, if they do speak out, they are likely to lose their jobs. So we all, the people who can, need to make it acceptable for them to be able to speak out. I mean, that's what Champion Women and the Women's Sports Policy Working Group has been trying to do, is trying to be the pierce of the arrow, trying to be the people out front so that it makes it safe for the people behind us.
I think, yes, Nancy, I agree with you. I think just like in the same way that maybe boys do not, I don't think, decide to identify as a girl in order for the specific purpose of winning at sports. I think coaches don't recruit a trans-identified boy, but the side effect is that that the boy is better in girls sports. The boy does have an advantage in girls sports, and that coach does get an athlete with an advantage. So even if that was not their original intent, that is the side effect. That is the effect. I mean, that is what happens. So, kind of in the way that no cheater, Lance Armstrong, never started out saying, "Yo, I'm gonna cheat to win." No, they always have another excuse. There's always something else. There's always another reason, another justification. No one ever starts out to say, "I'm going to cheat in order to win," but that is what happens. That is the end result.
Yeah. Before we're going to go down this route and talk a little bit about this, but I want to back up, and because I have some more questions about coaching her. We kind of moved on, but I'm still interested in hearing about the Tucker Center. We talked a little bit before about this wasn't always their thing. So when was that switch? What was that switch like? What were they doing before? What?
That is the $1,000 question, and maybe that is it. It often goes back to money. I don't really know. Before they have done these major reports, these major kind of compilations of all of their research at various times. 1997, another one was done in 2008 or something, and then more recently in 2018. And the older, and they kind of mash it up, so it's this kind of um, incoherent and contradictory type of research. The older research pre 2008 is legitimate research on girls, where they actually defined girl as, there was a woman, a female under 18 years of age. There was no words about identification or anything like that. It appeared to be a sex-based definition. And in 2008, I would have to say gender identity was not much of a topic in 2008. So all of their research pre 2008 is legitimate stuff about sports issues that women deal with, like age of menarche, amenorrhea, sports amenorrhea, where if you train very hard, sometimes you lose periods, osteoporosis, other sports injuries, ACL injuries, specific injuries that are very endemic in women because of the way they're built, because of the Q angle of their hips and their knees, things that women are more prone to than boys. They did research on that. That is legitimate, and there's scientific. They followed scientific method. All of that. It was actual science, actual research on actual women pre 2008. Something happened. A miracle occurred. I don't know. I don't know where or why that happened, but it usually has to do with money. They abandoned actual science because there is no science behind there is currently no science that says a man can fully become a woman, or even remove all male advantage so that a man could fairly compete in the female category. That's why World Athletics, World Aquatics have banned trans women, because the science says that there is no way hormone replacement therapy, surgery, nothing. None of that removes male advantage. It's still there.
Yeah.
So
I want to.
so there is no science. So I don't know. So anything that they're doing of late, like after 2015, apparently they adopted this ideology that a girl or a woman was anyone who identified as a girl or a woman. Then for that to happen, they really could not support that with any science. There is no science that supports that. It's simply they became advocates of ideology.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I've worked with the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women's Sports for years and years, and shared the podium and whatnot. And so they have two taglines. One is the hashtag Here's Proof, that tries to show people that how so many people want to watch women's sports and they want to go to women's sports, right? So, they take a picture of the crowd. Here's proof. If you invest in women's sports. And the second one that they talk about a lot is called Let the Data Tell the Story, which is for years and years, every year they've come out with a research report that looks at all the women coaches and says, like, how many were replaced by men, how many were replaced by women, how many, how are we doing? And, women are doing a little bit better, but women are pretty much locked out of the ability to coach men. There are a few exceptions, but, they're novel precisely because they are these rare exceptions. So then, now it's about, 50-50 or 60-50 of men who are coaching women. And there are people like me who I never had a woman's coach my entire career. So it is letting the data tell the story. And I think that using that, both of those things, here's proof and let the data tell the story. I will say everybody should follow Greg Brown. He's listed, he's one of the listeners here, and he's an excellent researcher and excellent scientist who has published a great deal about this. He and, there's a bunch of them. Ross Tucker, another one is fond of Beatles, right? Emma Hilton, right? But if you really want to dig into the science, it is very well done. And Greg, as I said, who's on here, is aces in the on the issue of can a male remove all the athletic advantages that they get with either surgery or drugs or whatever? Answer's no. And then two is the issue of can women take drugs to be equal to men? Answer no. And anyway, he's just done some really great work, and I recommend following him.
We're going to bring Greg on in a little bit to address the more physical realities about this. Let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing recently. I think the activists knew that this was not a winning issue in terms of rights for trans-identified individuals. So, but now this is everywhere. We're seeing it certainly in college sports. In recent weeks, we've seen women's collegiate volleyball teams forfeiting in matches against San Jose State University, which has a trans identifier or male player on its team. So Nancy, why don't you want to give us an update on?
Sure. Yeah, so we're up to 5 teams now that have boycotted. There was one team that did compete, and the spike was so hard that it knocked another player over. I've reached out to my volleyball people, and they say that almost never happened, like to the degree that this person, that how much that they got spiked. So it's not safe for volleyball players. I mean, the way that we account for men's athletic advantage is that the net is 7 inches higher in the men's game than it is the women's game. And I honestly don't think that this is the job of athletes to do. You're asking them to give up an awful lot. I think it is the adults in the room to come up with a policy any more than it was Shirley Babishoff's responsibility to speak out against the East Germans that were cheating. It's just right. I mean, Shirley should have had the entire Olympic apparatus supporting what it is that she was saying. It wasn't until 1999 that that WADA got started, the World Anti-Doping Association. So, that's, hopefully this is not going to take that long. But I do think that it's the adults in the room. It is the legislators. It is the coaches and the the families, etc. They should be doing the work. It should not be up to the women. And yet, they've had to speak out.
So, and right, so now it's up to 5 teams. Well, is this is it a reasonable response given that, and is it in the best interest of these women? People were saying, the girls just refuse to play. The young women should refuse to play, and so that's what we're seeing. But what are these young sacrificing?
Well, I mean, it goes down essentially as a loss for them. They are, they are Division I athletes. This is about 2 to 3% of all high school athletes that have an opportunity to play in college. One of the things I said in notes afterwards is, we do all this research showing how women are discriminated against both in the high school and the college level. But the chance to be able to play Division I is really rare. So it'd be like, saying that it's up to musicians to be able to stop, say, if there was a, either, sexually abusing artist, that it would be up to all the other athletes instead of the executives who would be making the decision. I'm a firm believer that it's not the girls, their individual battle. That if this transgender ideology has gotten away from us and is ignoring biology and is ignoring facts and science and provability, then all of the people who are in higher education and it's all these other groups, they should be the ones that are making the difference, not leaving it up to college students. That's 18 to 22-year-olds. Really? It's up to them to make the change? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. And these younger girls, we retweeted this video of this 14-year-old girl who was talking about losing, I think it might have been track, losing a medal to a male, and it was heartbreaking. That the adults in the room, if you check our timeline, you can find it, but our posts, and to see this young girl by herself standing up in front of this lectern, kind of lecturing the adults, it really was heartbreaking. And I feel for these, I do feel for these young women who feel that this is their only recourse. I mean, I think, safety alone warrants doing this, but they shouldn't be the ones standing for it. Also, I see these, certainly the young boys, not young, but high school boys, and I have tremendous compassion for these male athletes that are caught up in this controversy, knowing what we know about this cohort. Um, they're as much a victim. I think it's hard to have compassion for them sometimes, but they are as much a victim to this ideology. They've been told that what they're doing is brave, and they're entitled to this, and that they're not really male, and all these really destabilizing messages. And I also have tremendous anger for the adults who enabled and encouraged them. I mean, so it's not just these young women and girls who are put in this horrific, really unfair, unjust position, but what are we doing to these young men? And it's never young women. We know that's not the case. It's these young men. What do we owe an athlete like Blair Fleming, who is on that San Jose State volleyball team?
I don't think. I think it's a little late for Blair Fleming. Truth would be a good thing, but I think I believe if I'm reading right that Blair Fleming was transitioned probably by her parents. I think she started puberty blockers at 11 or 12 and cross-sex hormones a couple of years later, and given that he's wearing lycra short shorts, I would say probably surgery as well, by age 14, because Blair Fleming competed in female volleyball throughout high school, so would have had to probably make that transition, by age 14. So that we're talking about, probably a decade of being lied to. So it might be a little bit too late for Blair Fleming.
Well,
what I would hope for in future that we could work towards is just a admission, or just to be on the same page, like to have the same truth, that if gender if gender doctors could be truthful with their patients, that that they were not going to change their sex. Excuse me. That they were not going to be able to change their sex, and that the rest of the world was not going to have to accept them as a woman.
Yeah.
Can I jump in if you don't mind? Yeah, I want you all to notice that there is no effort to get men to be kind. There's no effort to get men to say, hey, listen, we've got this, we have a male who identifies as transgender. I want you all to make it safe for this person to be able to be in the men's locker room. Nobody's saying that. It's all this emphasis on women. The research shows, and Greg can attest to this some more, but the males, however they identify, they don't lose their male criminality. And the reason why we have separate restrooms and changing rooms, etc., is because of male criminality. So we just got over Me Too. That was just a few years ago. We have done nothing to curb Me Too. And yet here they're just opening up the women's changing rooms for adult males to be able to go in and watch little girls change to get ready for swimming. And there's no recognition of just how painfully dangerous that this is. We talked about in the He Cheats, and it is .org, about how many men, were up to 700 and plus men who have infiltrated women's sports. How many women have to be sexually assaulted? How many women have to, right? And I'm not saying that somebody is, it's, remember the gay debate, there was this idea that gay people were inherently more deviant in their sexual desires. Okay, I'm not saying any of that. It has nothing to do with somebody being transgender, and it has everything to do with somebody being male. So males are a danger to women, period. When I was 19 years old, right in the middle of my swimming career, I was stronger. I was stronger probably than 0.001% of all females. And I was raped for 2.5 hours. And the fight wasn't even close. Not even a little bit. And it wasn't until like we started getting into this gender stuff, and I worked out with men and competed, etc., that I really came to appreciate. He was just an average guy, and I was the best in the world. I was like the strongest of the strong women, and it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't even close. So we have all these laws on the books, like voyeurism, like exposing yourself, right? And women didn't consent to having those criminal laws taken off the books. Women need places to be able to protect themselves. They need hospital wards. They need their criminal, they need prisons that are just for women. And that is, from my perspective, has always been the liberal, the democratic thing to be arguing for, to be saying. I do know of a few, Jackson Katz and others, who have been arguing, who have long been saying that, rape is a men's issue. But for the most part, it has been up to women. And I think that this same issue is they're putting all the burden on women to be kind. And there's no reason why we can't ask men to be kind to their teammates.
Yeah.
I wonder if I might have missed this earlier in the conversation when we first started out, but there is a model already going for inclusion of trans people, and that is women who identify as men already choose to compete because they know about sex differences, already choose to compete, remain in the women's category. They don't cease to exist, as many trans people will claim that they cease to exist if they are made to compete in their own sex category. Women have proven and have already modeled that this works marvelously. I would like to point out Nikki Hill's Olympic middle distance runner, identifies as trans non-binary. She identifies as male, but she has run her entire career in the female category. She is female and is welcomed and runs without any, welcomed in the female category. There's no controversy whatsoever because no one cares how she can identify. She does not cease to exist. She's not suicidal. She competes. Her identity is respected by her teammates, by those around her, and her identity remains intact. Her sex is the same. Men could do that too. Male sports have not been tasked with inclusion. Only women's sports have been tasked with including a subset of males. Why? Men could also compete in their sex category. Women can, men can. It's not an impossibility. Men's sports should be tasked with including males who identify as female. Men who identify as female should be told you got to compete in the male category. You're male. You compete in your sex category. That's it. I mean, it's very simple.
We're going to bring Greg Brown on in a second. Know if either of you have you seen, have you talked to anyone on our side of the aisle, any legislators or officials, appointed officials? Are you seeing any movement, any opening, anywhere, any place in there that we can start to move Democrats on this issue? Okay, that's a lot of silence.
No, I give DIAG, this group here, a lot of credit for starting this. The whole, that is the whole thing besides just the athletics that we are. And yeah, we it just is going to take more and more of us speaking out. We know that the reason why that the regulations did not come out on Title IX that had to do with athletics was because they got so many responses that declined to go along with this gender ideology. And so we just need more and more people to care about the issue and do what they can. It just it's one brave person at a time, and don't think it's not going to affect you, because eventually it will.
Yeah,
I think I don't know about legislators, but average Americans, the number of Americans who believe people should compete in sports in their birth sex is rising, and the number who believe in gender identity is falling. And I think that is a result of actual education as opposed to indoctrination. So I think if the public actually is moving in that direction, they will vote for. I think they will vote their conscience on that. So I don't know about legislators. I don't moving away, but I think their constituents are changing their minds.
Yeah. Well, that might be what it takes, is educating the constituency and then putting pressure on through them. And, I'll talk a little bit about it later, this action that we're trying to get in place to help wake up our legislators on this issue. We do have Greg Brown on. Hi, Greg. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to ask you, I see this quite, there are all these pat answers, right? Pat answers and questions that you get from the activist side of this that, they're painful because if they're nonsense questions. So this one I see over and over again, and it's, so there's this acceptance. Yeah, it's true that like many boys, there was that race, many boys, or they looked at the data, many boys on high school track teams can outrun the world's fastest woman. So an Olympic gold medalist could be outrun by boys on high school track teams. So what context should we view this in? Because, the be kind inclusivity voices would say, well, it's because they're better athletes. And yes, they have advantages, but look at Michael Phelps. They're always bringing up Phelps, always about Phelps. So to say, why not, why wouldn't you then just disqualify all of the better athletes so that the worst athletes, that's worse male athletes and women, can get their participation trophy? How do you respond to that discussion about natural advantage, differences in natural advantage? And, all three of you can speak to it. And actually, sorry, we should introduce Greg because maybe everybody doesn't know. Greg, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Let's see. Oh, we're not hearing Greg. Uh-oh, we got a technical problem. Yeah, we can't hear you, Greg. Uh-oh. You may need to log out and log back in. And if you're not on your phone, you may run into problems. So try logging out. Yeah. But yeah, Nancy, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
I'll answer that one.
Okay.
So first of all, Fonda Beatles. If you look for her on X on Twitter, and she has done the whole Phelps Gambit. She's all written the whole thing out, or you can probably, if you Google it. So the difference between Michael Phelps and his other male competitors was teeny tiny. The difference between Michael Phelps and the best female competitors, was enormous. We're talking tenths of a second versus 30 seconds. Okay, we're talking a pool length. So that's the gap there. And again, the whole point of creating a women's sports category was to be able to give women these equal opportunities, but it was to exclude male advantage. If there was a category that excluded somebody from participating who had a certain wingspan. But I've shared over and over again a picture of Missy Franklin, one of the world's greatest backstrokers, who used to hold the world record, and Ryan Lochte, who also held the world record. So they're the same height, they have the same wingspan. They, and he is 10 to 12% faster than she is. So there's no way to slice up a human being in such a way that women would have, like, you can't do it by, body weight or body fat percentage or any of these other metrics, right? Height, weight, blah, blah, that gives women equal opportunities. If you want to come up with another way of divvying up opportunities, women are going to get less. Greg, are you ready to talk now?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for letting me be here, and I'm really blushing with how much Nancy was saying I'm good at what I do, because really I don't hold a candle to like Emma Hilton or Ross Tucker or Tommy Lundberg. Those three are definitely the all-stars. I'm more of like the AAA batter that's been called up for an emergency or something.
That is so not true. Oh my God, sorry.
But one of the things, and Nancy, you hit it on the head with the Michael Phelps gambit, right? We hear that. And the other thing, if you look at it, you look at how much Michael Phelps won his races by. When he was setting his world records and stuff, they were well within the normal expectation. A lot of them were less than a 1% advantage that he had over either the previous world record or the person that he beat that got second place. So that's totally normal, And then the other question, as she said, part of the goal of sports, and John Pike has done a great job explaining this, how part of the goal of sports is to find these outstanding, exemplary athletes that do extremely, extremely well in a specific sport. And again, Katie Ledecky in the 800-meter freestyle is just amazing as a woman. But yet there was 20 men in the U.S. Olympic trials that swam faster than her world record. So we have a category for women to find those absolutely amazing, outstanding women. We have a category for men to find those absolutely outstanding men. Another example to maybe help people relate with this is if you look at wrestling. In wrestling, you have, in high school, there's 14 different weight classes from like 103 pounds to 285 pounds. Because if you just had wrestling, all you'd have is heavyweights, right? The lightweights would never get a chance. And so we have these sporting categories and how so many different forms of sports to find the athletes that truly do have these great genetic benefits. And I love this quote. I've been using it a lot lately. The effects of the Y chromosome dwarfs all other known DNA polymorphisms. And so, yeah, give a woman all of the great genetic advantages that she can have to be a great athlete, she's still not going to compete with the men who are equally great as men. And again, that's nothing wrong with being a great female athlete and recognizing she can't compete with the men and recognizing that the men should not be able to compete with the women. Another thing I like to say on this is we don't allow smaller, less muscular, or less athletic boys or men compete in girls' sports just because they're smaller, less muscular, less athletic. And so this whole idea that if a male takes testosterone suppression and can be in the female range, should be able to compete in the female category is really just misguided, I think.
Yeah, and we're seeing the fallout. We are seeing the fallout, and I think once we can get this conversation, have a broader audience for it, I think it is an argument that people would really, it pushes up against their kind of the incoherence of this, which is why I think the activists don't like it. Um,
Can I jump in for a sec?
of course,
Something that Greg just said about sports looking for the best. There's a lot, actually. Nike and another well-funded project, inaptly named the Female Athlete Project, headed up by Kate Ackerman, are again studying how to get trans athletes and athletics, and their goal is to try to hobble. It's anti spirit of sport. Sport is looking to push what is possible in the excellence of the human body. Like, what can a human body do? Like the utmost, the peak performance of what a human body could do is kind of the spirit of sport. But when you're looking at what a lot of this science that is now being pursued is how you can hobble a male enough to compete in the female category. It's just anti spirit of sport, like that you could how can you disadvantage a male enough so that he can compete in the female category?
right. When there was talk about, well, okay, we'll let boys into the female categories in high school if they were put on blockers young enough, right? Like Tanner stage 2. And the thought that this would be a factor in a decision making process for a boy who's confused, right, about gender, whatever that is terrifying, right? That we are providing a reason to do something so dangerous and damaging in order to get into sports. We should not hold that out there like a carrot. So that kind of alarmed me. And I do want to say that I did reach out to Kate Ackerman. Oftentimes we try and get opposing viewpoints on here. We have never been successful, and we did not get a response to Kate Ackerman. So
Actually, I didn't either.
yeah,
I guess I'm not surprised.
no, unfortunately, no, it's not surprising. So, and then I want to go. We've had a couple of questions. That one was about some cases in Minnesota of males in sports, and this case with J.C. Cooper. Is anybody following that?
I know something about it. J.C. Cooper is a power lifter,
Right.
weightlifter who uh, want is a male, trans-identified male who competed. I think sued the was it USA Powerlifting to
Right.
compete in the female category. and won, I believe. I'm not sure where that is anymore. I don't know where that case is right now.
Looks like USA Powerlifting is appealing maybe to the Minnesota Supreme Court on that.
I think J.C. Cooper claimed discrimination.
Right. Well, this is similar to the Tennessee band case, that it's discrimination in that case as well.
I don't know law. I'm not a lawyer. And so I can't figure out how that would, maybe Nancy knows about this, how that would fly. I mean, his sex is male. So how could you win on that? I don't understand. It seems perfectly logical that you would be discriminated against based on your male sex.
Right. I mean, that is how I would have gone about it too. What really piqued my interest of getting involved in the whole issue was the Equality Act. So I've led so many things trying to get, say, an equal rights amendment passed, like, for a state or locally. Never once did I think 10 years ago, when I was the face of the face of a campaign, that I was thinking that this would impact women's sports or women's private spaces. So what the Biden administration right now, unfortunately, is trying to do is equate sex with gender identity. So I think probably most people on this call would agree that sex should also include sexual orientation. And so what they've done is they've just made it bigger and to include gender identity in there as well. So when they say no discrimination based on sex, it sort of goes to that the political slogan of trans women are women, and that they should be able to access women's spaces. And so what the law does then is it says, okay, well, if sex discrimination equals gender identity discrimination, then somebody who identifies as being a woman, they get to compete. They get to be part of this. And I think we're seeing a lot of pushback right now by national governing bodies. But unfortunately, it takes a Leah Thomas. It takes something like that to make it happen.
Yeah. Right. And maybe it will. I think I think it's harder to argue for this when we have the data that's on he cheats or he cheated. They can't make the same claims anymore. So maybe we should move to questions. We have about 20 minutes left here. So questions for either, Greg or Nancy or Sarah. If people want to queue up, there were people asking to be let in before, but we don't do that till the end. So go ahead and queue up, and we'll let people ask questions. We did have a question earlier for Sarah about how many coaches are taking this Coaching Her course or program, viewing this program. And is this national? Is it local?
It's been rolled out globally. According to the director of Coaching Her, they can hardly keep up with the demand, she said, and from sports organizations. It, as far as I know, it has been rolled out and is made available nationally through state high school sports associations. Most coaches have to be a member of their state high school sports association. Some of those states are mandating that coaches take it. You know, there is some mandatory training that coaches have to take, and some states are mandating this training. It's also, I guess, been adopted by USA Tennis. So USA Tennis coaches at least have the availability. I'm not sure if it's mandatory for them to take this. It's in sports organizations in Mexico and New Zealand. She did not mention European countries, but it is it's extremely well funded. They have plenty of money, and so that kind of was part of my concern, is that it's by far the most concerted, well funded effort to introduce this ideology to coaches on a really giant level, nationally, internationally, through high school organizations, as well as individual sports organizations like USA Tennis. So it's available, and in some cases mandatory to coaches on a really wide level, but all of them are coaches of people in the age range, like in the teen range, between 11 and 17 years old.
Okay. And, it seems like, just hearing that messaging, even if you don't believe it, there is something about hearing those messages. It does get into your head. And if you can't act against it, it kind of doesn't matter whether or not you roll your eyes to what you're hearing. So I don't think I think it's more insidious than, um, than it appears. It's not,
Right.
this.
Well, and the fact that it is produced by Nike and the Tucker Center, that's some pretty, I mean, most people, if they don't necessarily aren't skeptical enough of Nike and the Tucker Center, would think that that is a very reputable source for this
Right.
training. So
Yeah.
that gives it a lot of legitimacy that it does not necessarily deserve.
So I mean, I have to believe that this is going to crumble. This is a house of cards, and it's going to fall at some point. But where do you all think we'll see the first cracks? What's going to be the order of events? Are we going to see it in elite level women's sports first? Then collegiate, and then grade school? W- Where are the first cracks? Big significant cracks going to appear?
If I may, we're starting to see some already. I think with the NAIA agreed that's primarily Division III schools, but it's still a big chunk of colleges that voted unanimously that one must be female at birth to compete in the female category. That's huge. And then we had another organization, was it British Fencing, just came out and said you've got to be female at birth to compete in the female category. So we're starting to see some things there. And then we have our 25 states in the United States that have passed laws on that. Most of those laws really are standing. There's only 6 that are being challenged in court, and eventually it's going to end up at the Supreme Court. I think that's where we're going to see a real landslide. If one of these cases from one of the states gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court makes a ruling on it, the challenge, of course, is one Supreme Court ruling may be very narrow to one specific case, and it's going to take a couple to make something happen. But we've got, unfortunately, the NC2A and the IOC dug in their heels and washed their hands of it, in essence. And so now you've got all the different sport organizations that are trying to come up with their own policies, which makes it a challenge. But we have started to see some cracks happening that I think is a positive sign.
Yeah, the problem, I mean, which is the same problem with the medicalization, is that where we're seeing movement is, typically in the red states, and because we're so polarized, that it's not like the blue states go, oh, something's interesting is happening and we should probably follow along or see what's happening. I mean, talk about digging your heels in. This it's almost going to push the blue states away from this. I mean, the fact that none of the AGs are in the blue states are joining with the AGs from the red states around the AAP and um, and the all of the stuff that's coming out around medicalization, the fraud, medical fraud. I think they're charging medical fraud or something like that. This is a sign of the problem, and so we're going to have this as well with sports if we can't actually reach people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just real quick, let me tell you a little history of the NCAA. In January, the NCAA got so much heat about Leah Thomas that they said they were going to push it off to the national governing bodies, which is kind of weird because they're in the United States, excluding professional sports. There are Olympic sports and there's school-based sports. So the NCAA is clearly in the realm of school-based sports. So for them to go say, oh, whatever, we're going to defer to the national governing bodies. So guess what? USA Swimming came up with a really good policy that would have prohibited Leah and others from being able to compete. Then the NCAA, on the QT, without telling anybody, formed a committee that any national governing body policy had to go through this committee. Oh, who's on the committee? Well, some of the most the most hardcore, trans women are women ideologues possible, that's who they put on the committee. So sadly, most people think that when the NCAA put out this press release that, hey, national governing bodies could really make a difference. Not true. Not true.
Yeah, I was wondering how that happened and why other sports weren't following suit. So I guess it sounds like it's not going to be that straightforward or easy anymore.
Well, it's also the sponsors, right? If you've got somebody like Nike that's captured, swimming doesn't have, Nike isn't in that world. So, but it makes it really hard for, another sport that does have Nike as one of their sponsors to be able to come up with policies that protect the women's category.
Yeah. Where do you see, like, who's making the most progress? We have, is it parents who are, or we have these feminist groups, turf groups, I guess they'd say, protesting at games and track meets, or is it the collegiate athletes forfeiting matches? I mean, do those things make a real difference?
I actually was always kind of like Nancy. I was always against girls forfeiting games or boycotting or forfeiting their opportunities. I have always been against that because I don't think it's their place, and because they lose. I mean, when they don't play, it's a win for the team with the trans person. Not only that, but in the case of that Vermont, there was a Vermont school that refused to play against a team that had it was a high school that refused to play against a school with a trans identified male player. And their school was subsequently banned from all sports. So they were punished for this stance for the rest of the season, all of their sports. So that did not seem to work. I guess this recent volleyball incidents where the 5 schools have forfeited has sort of changed my opinion about this, in that it has really seemed to nudge the needle. It has gotten a lot of attention. I don't know if the New York Times is, of course, not reporting on this, but it is receiving somewhat mainstream media attention, even if they're reporting it as anti-trans. Nonetheless, it is having something of an effect. So I might be, as much as I dislike that girls are having to sacrifice their own opportunities, it seems to have been effective.
Yeah, just to jump on what Sarah said, and also something Martina said beforehand, is we have got to get media attention and to be able to phrase it in a way that is not seen as bigoted. I am not a bigot. People who've known me and worked with me for a very long time know that I'm not a bigot. I have a transgender person in my family. I love them dearly, would never do anything that would hurt them, run things by them before I speak out on something. Not a bigot. But when it comes to women's sports and women's spaces, trans women need to recognize that they retain their male biology, and we need to do that. but I can't stress this enough. We need to get Democrats speaking as Democrats and not being afraid, or not having it come across as being anti-trans. This is not an anti-trans position. This is a pro-woman's issue. And Democrats have always been in favor of women's policy issues. This is a rare, unique situation. So get that media attention. Greg, what do you think is going to do it?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. I think it takes a lot of people on this. I would like to call out my fellow exercise scientists. They need to step up. When Tommy Lundberg and Ross Tucker and Emma Hilton, we were putting together this paper refuting the International Olympic Committee's statement on fairness and inclusion, I was contacting people I knew, and they all agreed with me, but they didn't want to get involved because they were afraid it might hurt their career. And then we did our follow-up paper. We got a couple more people in that. But we need that from the scientific side to state these truths, be willing to state these truths that males and females are different, and you cannot erase the male advantage, nor should we be doing that. I mean, we should be having male and female sports and let everybody exceed in their own sex-based category. This is very much a pro-women's movement. We need parents to be stepping up. Now, I do love what Riley Gaines said about that one time. She's texting her dad, "Oh my gosh, there's a naked man in the women's locker room." And her dad said something like, "Well, I'll come take care of it." Riley texted back, said, "No, Dad, we don't need you in jail." That is a challenge, but we do need parents that are willing to step up and talk to their school board, push back at the school board and say, "No, this is not fair. This is not fair to my daughter. This is not fair to athletes." We do need, unfortunately, it's been mentioned, our society is too polarized. We need both sides of the aisle to find places to compromise on things, and this should be a simple one. This really should be a simple one. But boy, it's hard. It's hard because of the money. I think one of the best things that could happen is if we could get Sebastian Coe to be the new president of the International Olympic Committee, because he was instrumental in getting the World Athletics, which is track and field, to adopt their policy that says nobody that has experienced male puberty can be in the female category. Not perfect, but at least it's a step in the right direction. I think if he were president of the IOC, we've seen with this all along, what happens at the IOC trickles down. And so if the IOC would step up and once again, police and protect the women's category, I think that would trickle down to lots of other areas, including the NC2A.
Yeah, I don't know how we got a bipartisan a vocal bipartisan group to reach out to legislators, but that seems to me, if we can't get that legislators might respond differently if we could get some Dems to join in here, because we just haven't had any luck. So it seems like we need something that shows true bipartisanship on this issue, that if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, but I firmly disagree because the other side sees this as an election issue, and they see it at I've interacted with some people who are authentically transphobic, like not like we are. and so they're already on board. We have to get Democrats involved and Democrats supportive, and then we win the issue. But first, we have to get the Democrats, and I don't think we can do that in a bipartisan way. I think that we can only do it by reaching out specifically to Dems.
Right, but it's already being, it's already being, there's pushback from the right already. So you couldn't say, well, we're doing this as Democrats and we're doing it. I guess you could say we're doing it differently than the Republicans on this issue. I mean, but to have something that has to be a part, a polarized viewpoint doesn't help us in any of the other realms. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how we move the needle on this. I do think people are getting very tired of the partisanship. So I don't know if that's enough of a of a of a plus at this point. We do have some questions, so we're gonna go to Jessica, and then we have somebody else who was, I thought it was Anne, but I don't see her. So Jessica, why don't you go on and ask your question?
I just wanted to say hi to Nancy. Hello, girl. I haven't seen you in forever. I just wanted to speak to what Sarah said about the lawsuits that you guys are losing because of the Equality Act, and the way to combat that, in my opinion, would be we need to get local legislation. At your state level, we need to get the language right, and if you can just get your Congress representatives to take out the word no discrimination and take out gender identity. You can't discriminate on age, sex, sexual preference, but it's the word gender identity. If you can get rid of that out of legislation, there will be, like, we have the lawsuits with Natalie Ryan in the pro disc golf. We have the other golfer in the LGA. So they're all winning these lawsuits, like Wisconsin's having to appeal because of that stupid word gender identity. So if we could get rid of that, then all this can go away a little easier.
That is true. Gender, when you have sex and gender identity together as protected categories, somehow sex always loses out. They're incompatible. You cannot, as has been proven over and over again, you cannot support women's sex-based rights and gender identity at the same time. They are absolutely incompatible with each other. If a man can self-identify as a woman, then it is impossible to protect women's sex-based rights. So yes, I agree. Removing the word gender identity, which is absolutely unverifiable. It's something that can change over time, and no one can verify except the individual. It's their own truth, which it's an unverifiable thing. Gender identity has no place in law. whereas sex does. Sex is verifiable. And so I think sex is something that could be protected, and gender identity needs to be removed, just like from Title IX.
So let me jump in to say, first of all, everybody should know that Jessica Gill has been a really great supporter of women-only sports. She is transgender and has really just been speaking out consistently. So thank you very much for that. So I do think that gender identity, as I said, I have a family member who's transgender, does need to be protected in that, like, say, employment, in banking, in family law, in right, in in every other space. But there are some places that women need, such as our own changing spaces, such as our own restrooms, our sports, our
Prison.
rape crisis centers, exactly, prison, right? These are right, are based on our sex that we need those rights. But I would not say throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are absolutely places that we need to have that gender identity does need to be protected.
I agree, and the hard part is going to be to make them separate, while the sports and the safe spaces need to not include gender identity. Whereas, yes, I don't want to be discriminated against, which I've been when I'm trying to apply for a job. Like, I'm currently unemployed. I can't get a job to save my life, but no, I can't prove that they're discriminating against me for my gender identity. But that's my choice. Like, I chose this lifestyle. This is what I have to deal with. I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about keeping men out of spaces and sports. That's my number one concern. So.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave our amazing space here, but you all carry on. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, we're going to wrap up anyway. So I'd like to thank our guests, Martina, who had to jump off quickly, Nancy Hogshaed, and Sarah Barker. Also, Greg Brown for joining us. Please check out their organizations and push your legislators to support sex-segregated women and girls sports. If you haven't already done so, please join DIAG by clicking on the Join button at diag.org. That's di-ag.org. Our power to reach our lawmakers is through our numbers. It's important to show that we are a silent majority who believe in classical liberal principles, following the science, ethical evidence-based medicine for all, the power of civil discourse, advocating for the rights of women and girls to sex-based spaces, honors, and opportunities, LGBT rights, and the necessity of a compassionate, reality-based society where truth matters. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good rest of your evening.